What if everything you've been taught is good? Kindness, humility, compassion, turning the other cheek wasn't actually good at all. What if it was something darker? The disguised revenge fantasy of people who were too weak to fight back? That's not an edgy internet take. That's the central argument of one of the most unsettling books in the history of philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morality, written in 1887. And once you understand it, you cannot unsee it. Friedrich Nietzsche was a 19th century German philosopher and one of the most remarkable minds in the history of Western thought. At 24, he was appointed professor of classical philology at the University of Basel before he had even finished his doctorate. The university simply waived the requirement for him. He was that good. But he eventually left academia, lived alone in cheap boarding houses across Europe, and writing in bursts between periods of his illnesses. Migraines, failing eyesight, near total isolation. He published books that almost no one read during his lifetime. He knew it, but he wrote anyway. And the question driving all of his works wasn't what is good that every philosopher asks. His question was sharper, it was stranger. Where did our idea of good come from? So here's the setup. For most of human history, philosophers asked, what is good? They debated definitions, constructed systems, argued about God and reason and nature. Nietzsche asked something completely different. How did certain things come to be called good in the first place? He's doing what you might call a genealogy, tracing the family history of moral concepts, not their logical justifications, but their actual historical and psychological origins. And what he finds disturbs him deeply. His thesis, in plain language: our current moral values, especially the ones that celebrate humility, self-denial, compassion, and meekness, did not come from God or reason or human nature. They came from resentment. They are the values of people who were dominated, who couldn't fight back, and who found a way to win symbolically by rewriting the rules of the game. To understand this, you need to grasp the distinction Nietzsche draws between two completely different moral systems. The first he calls aristocracy morality. This is the value system of people who are strong, powerful, self-sufficient, beautiful. It starts from the inside out. The noble type looks at himself and says, I am good, I am strong, I am alive. And only as an afterthought does he glance downward and say, and that, down there, it's bad. Bad meaning weak, unfortunate, burdened. It's not quite evil, it's just a lesser degree of that. The second is slave morality. This starts from the outside in. It begins not with self-affirmation, but with hatred of the other. The first move is, he is evil, and only then, derivatively, therefore, I, who am nothing like him, must be good. The difference sounds subtle, but it's enormous. Noble morality is active. It creates values out of surplus, out of strength. Slave morality is reactive. It cannot define itself except by opposing something else. Remove the enemy, and it has nothing to say about itself at all. Nietzsche gives a beautiful image for this. The noble type is like a bow, taut, self-contained, generating its own force. The slave type is like a shadow. It only exists in relation to something else casting it. The engine of slave morality is what Nietzsche calls in French ressentiment. Not just resentment in the ordinary sense, but a specific psychological condition, a deep, festering, creative hatred that cannot express itself directly and so turns inward and transforms itself. Here's the situation. You are dominated. You can't fight back. Every instinct of revenge and rage hits a wall. So what do you do with all that energy? You revalue. You take everything that made your oppressor powerful, his strength, his pride, his pleasure in life, his refusal to feel guilty, and you redefine all of it as a moral evil. And then you take everything about yourself, your weakness, your suffering, your inability to act, and you redefine all of that as moral virtue. This is Nietzsche's core insight. Ressentiment is creative. The slave revolt in morality isn't passive. It's an act of imaginative genius. The subjugated managed to flip the entire value system upside down, so that the powerful end up defined as wicked, and the weak end up defined as righteous. And here is the most chilling part. It works. It has worked so thoroughly that most of us have entirely forgotten it happened. And you can see the examples of that slave morality in day-to-day things. For example, think about how we talk about success. Someone builds a company, accumulates wealth, rises to the top of their field, and the immediate cultural reflex is suspicion. What did they exploit? Who did they cheat? Who did they step on? The achievement itself becomes evidence of wrongdoing. Strength treated as inherently guilty until proven innocent. That's not a neutral moral intuition. That's the revaluation Nietzsche is describing. Power redefined as wickedness, simply for being power. Or think about it on a personal level. Think about the time you watched someone close to you succeed at something you wanted, a promotion, a relationship, a talent, and felt that flicker of something dark. Not admiration, not inspiration, something that wanted to find the flaw in it. Wanted to reframe their success as luck or privilege or something unearned. That's not rational analysis. That's ressentiment doing its work in real time. Nietzsche would say you're not thinking clearly, you're performing an ancient inversion in miniature, turning someone else's strength into evidence of their unworthiness, because it's easier than confronting what it reveals about you. Now, we come to Nietzsche's most controversial argument, and I want to be upfront, what follows is his reading of history, not mine. Nietzsche gets very specific about where he believes this inversion happened historically. He points to the ancient world, Rome, in his view, as the supreme expression of noble morality. Strong, proud, unapologetically powerful. And then he points to what he calls the slave revolt, traced, he argues, through ancient Judea, the most systematically oppressed people of their time. Unable to defeat Rome militarily, they developed, in his account, a value system that inverted everything Rome stood for. Strength became arrogance, pride became sin. The powerful were not admirable, they were wicked. And the meek would inherit the world. Then comes his most provocative claim. Christianity, he argues, is not the opposite of this resentment. It is its greatest achievement. Jesus, the gospel of love, the message of peace, all of this, for Nietzsche, the same inversion wearing a more seductive disguise. The slave revolt achieved what no army could. It took Rome, the master of the world, and converted it, spiritually conquered it, got it to kneel. And here's what Nietzsche finds so striking. That desire is not new. Homer, writing 1,000 years earlier, called revenge sweeter than honey. The ancient world felt the same hunger openly, named it without shame, and celebrated it in epic poetry. The warrior wanted revenge and said so. What Christianity did, what Nietzsche finds both ingenious and disturbing, is take that exact same desire and make it unrecognizable even to the person feeling it. The Christian doesn't want revenge, he wants justice. He doesn't hate his enemy, he hates unrighteousness. He isn't dreaming of his oppressor's suffering, he is simply trusting in the judgment of God. The feeling underneath, Nietzsche argues, is identical to Homer's warrior, but it has been so thoroughly translated into the language of righteousness that the person experiencing it genuinely cannot see what it is. The honey is just as sweet, the jar has a different label. There's a philosophical layer to this worth mentioning briefly, because it holds the whole structure together. The slave morality needs the idea of a free subject, a self that stands behind its actions and chooses them freely. Why? Because without that, there is no one to blame. Nietzsche uses a striking image. We say the lightning flashes, but there isn't a separate entity called lightning that decides to flash. The flash is the lightning. There is no doer behind the deed. The strong man doesn't have strength and then choose to deploy it. He just is what he does. The slave morality needs the fiction of free choice. Because if the strong man couldn't have done otherwise, you can't call him evil. And so, Nietzsche argues, the concept of the soul, the free, choosing self, was never a metaphysical discovery, it was a psychological tool, a way of making the powerful guilty for being powerful. Here where it gets really uncomfortable. You might be thinking, okay, fine, I reject religion. I'm a secular person. I believe in reason, equality, human dignity. Nietzsche anticipates this. In the Genealogy, he actually stages a dialogue with an imagined freethinker, someone who accepts his entire historical analysis, shrugs and says, so what? The people triumphed. Maybe that was the humanity's mission. I like the values even without the church, and that for Nietzsche is precisely the problem. The freethinker thinks he escaped Christianity by dropping the theology, but his democratic instincts, his compassion for the weak, his sense that suffering is bad and equality is good, all of that is the Christianity, fully metabolized, running without the label. The slave morality has become so thoroughly the water we all swim in that its origins are invisible even to people who pride themselves on clear-sightedness. Nietzsche would point to the secular instinct that any hierarchy is inherently suspicious, that wherever some people are above others, the presumption is that something corrupt produced it, or the idea that the primary moral obligation of the successful is to redistribute their wealth. People who feel those emotions think that this is pure reason. Nietzsche's argument is that they are nothing of the sort. They are Christian values with a theology quietly removed. You can agree or disagree with him on that, but the challenge is worth sitting with. So before we wrap up, it's worth being honest about what Nietzsche is and isn't arguing, and where his argument has real problems. He's not saying the strong should just dominate the weak and we should just enjoy it. He's not writing a political program. He's doing something more like a psychological diagnosis, asking whether our current values serve life, growth, and genuine human flourishing, or whether they represent a kind of spiritual sickness dressed as virtue. His genuine concern is this, that the leveling of humanity, the democratic flattening of all distinction, guiltification of excellence, produces not peace but something worse, exhaustion, a civilization tired of itself, what he calls nihilism. Look around and you can feel that exhaustion. Institutions that nobody believes in anymore, but nobody knows how to replace. A widespread sense that ambition is suspect, that greatness is probably just ego, that the safest bet is to want less, claim less, risk less. Nietzsche would say we've been so thoroughly trained out of aspiration that we have mistaken the cage for the ground. But here's where he is the most vulnerable. His own argument contains a tension he never fully resolves. If there is no free subject behind actions, if the weak can't help being resentful any more than the strong can help being strong, that the whole dimension of his project collapses. He can't blame the weak for ressentiment if they couldn't have done otherwise. And he can't praise nobility if noble self-overcoming requires the very kind of free agency he's just dissolved. He also never quite answers what should we value instead. The image of the noble aristocracy is genuinely disturbing and was historically weaponized in ways that would have horrified him. The vision of great, self-affirming humanity remains frustratingly vague. So, why read Nietzsche in 2026? Not to agree with him, not to become a Nietzschean, but because he forces a question that almost no one else has the nerve to ask seriously. Where do your values come from? And what are they actually for? Every time you feel moral outrage, every time you call something unjust or evil or cruel, it's worth pausing and asking, is this coming from somewhere genuine? From the real love or care or vision? Or is it coming from somewhere smaller, from resentment, from envy, from the need to define myself against an enemy? That question is uncomfortable. But the fact that it's uncomfortable is probably the best argument that Nietzsche was onto something. So I leave it to you. Is Nietzsche diagnosing something real about how we build our moral lives? Or is this just aristocratic nostalgia dressed up as philosophy? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely interested where you stand. Subscribe if you want more. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.